Thank you very much, Matteo. I'm Johannes. Thank you for being here tonight. TDC is something important, also in Germany, so it's a big honor. Thank you. I first would like to introduce my team Erik here tonight. There is Inga over there in the third row. She's the designer of the book. She did everything. Then we have two authors, co-authors tonight here. There's Susanna. She is also a designer. She's Erik's wife. And she wrote a very nice short text about him as a private person, right? And there's Christian Schwarz, again. Also wrote the text. And then we have Erik. I thought to start with a short introduction into me, to myself, who I am, because everybody knows Erik and nobody knows me. This has to be changed. So it's short. Okay, that's me. Born 65 in Hamburg, 86 to 92 communication design studies in Kiel, 19 to 92 some work with Lou Breyer, which is a quite famous designer in Germany, and Neville Brody. Then 92 MetaDesign internship. Met Erik. Didn't get a job. Thank you. Had to found my own studio, Factor Design, 92 to 2010. In 2010, I decided to do something different. After 18 years of Factor, I don't know. This is a different story. Since then, Erler Spiekermann, and in between from 12 to 14, art direction for Stern magazine. Maybe you know Stern magazine, with a star on the cover. I did this for 2.5 years, and then I was done. So I went back to Erler Spiekermann. I'm married, 2 boys, 1 dog, still Hamburg. What we do is corporate identity, editorial design, typefaces, so what everybody does. So some examples. This is an identity for a theater in Bremen, city in Hamburg. These are 3 other identities for theater, so we work very often for theaters. It's an interesting work. Thalia Theater in Hamburg, Deutsches Theater Berlin, Dresden. This is some identity stuff for the furniture department of Rosenthal, famous German company. So then we do lots of books, book design. This is a catalog for an exhibition. This is a series of books I did a few years ago about German design, in Neugierig series. Neugierig means curious. This was the call for entries for number 4. This is the cover of a very famous German book called Momo. I don't know if it's known also in America. It's for the 40th anniversary. Some posters. So this is a series about German designers elected every year as the designer of the year. German magazine Architektur und Wohnen. Gaetano Pesce, Gricic, Dixon, Alfredo Häberli. So this is what we did 2 years ago in collaboration with Luke Heyman of Pentagram, who is not here tonight, unfortunately. Wanted to come. This is Stern magazine, the redesign, relaunch we did 2 years ago. And this is another magazine called Kult. And finally, some typeface. Oh, this is a Pi font called FF Dingbatz, so it's a symbol font. And a type family for Germany's newspaper, Süddeutsche Zeitung, which is the biggest quality paper in Germany. What we say, quality paper, I mean. Don't know what it means. It's good, it's a good paper. Is it?
It's a quality paper.
It's a quality paper.
As opposed to a rag.
Right. Okay, that's it. That was me. And now comes Erik. I thought before we start talking, I want to give you a short introduction about the structure of the book, how we started it, and this is the table of content, which is unfortunately in German, but I have my English book here to translate if I don't know some words. Okay, on the left side, it's easy. Content, so it's introduction, it's works, it's 7 questions, which is a special part of the book. It's a list of typefaces. Then we have a part about colleagues, and in the end, an index, of course. And on the right side, you see all the different texts we have in the book, starting with the prefaces, of course, then a piece about Erik as a child, young man, until he starts MetaDesign, and so on. A text about the split with MetaDesign, which is very important, some other texts. And on the right side, Gastbeiträge means contributors. So we have 19 different authors, as for example Susanna and Christian, who wrote short texts about Erik and their special connections. So we have Christoph Busse, for example, who is an old friend from school, right? And a musician, and Erik and him made music together, and Erik did all this design stuff for their bands, for his band. And we have Wally Ollens, the one who gave Erik his first job in London. Died last year, no, this year. Mm-hmm. Then we have Johannes Spiekermann, his first wife, Jürgen Sieber, the CEO of Font Shop. Neville Brody is well known. Alexander Branchik is another important colleague from the Meta Times. Bruno Schmidt also, he still runs Meta Zurich. Mirko Borsch is a German designer. Bill Hill is his partner from Meta West, California. Then we have Susanna, we have Jürgen Korzer, who is a client. Robin Richmond, Meta London. Stefan Sargmeister wanted to be here tonight, but is in Berlin, unfortunately, so we switched places. André Kupetz is the CEO of the Rat für Formgebung, which is quite similar to the TDC, maybe, to make it short, right. Christian, Michael Bierut is not here tonight too. I invited him. Erik van Blokland, typeface designer. Göran Lagerström is your partner at EdenSpiekermann. And Christoph Niemann is the illustrators. And they all did some text that we can talk about later, maybe. So, to understand the book, I wanted to read one preface, which makes it easier to understand how this book works. Let me see if I find it. No. Ah, okay. And I need my glasses. So this preface is called 7 Ages of Spiekermann, user manual for this book. When one looks at Erik Spiekermann's life's work, one is not only struck by the sheer abundance of quality work, but also by how intertwined his many activities are. Words, type, and design are connected to entrepreneurship, networks, and technical knowledge. Over the course of nearly 50 years, in the profession, he has created an impressive graphic cosmos that has had a massive influence on graphic design in Germany and abroad, and which is impossible to capture in its entirety, even in this book. The work section of this book, which begins on page 28, divides Spiekermann's work into 7 clusters. The typographer shows the most important typeface designs. So these are 2 samples of pages from the book about cluster typographer. This is an early sketch for the low type, and this is what is it? Officina, right? Display. I don't know. Second cluster is the designer, documents his major work as a graphic designer. So we have, for example, here a stamp set for the Dutch Post, and his work for the BVG, the Berlin Verkehrsgesellschaft, which is the traffic company, Berlin's. Right. Then we have third cluster is the entrepreneur, describes Spiekermann as the founder of numerous companies. So this is an early picture of founding the font shop. We have Johannes Spiekermann in the middle, here sitting on the table, and we have Neville Brody over there. And this, for example, is the Meta House in Berlin, which Erik planned and never stepped in because he split before with Meta, and so now MetaDesign is in that house, but Erik never was. He never was in there. Not only, maybe in the night or by... Never. Okay. So could you? I mean, what would happen if you step into? Okay. It's an interesting story. I mean, the split with Meta is something... Okay. Then we have the networker, fourth cluster, looks at his many professional activities. This, for example, is are some pictures from Fuse conference in '95. He founded with Neville Brody, and this is the Typo, which is the biggest design congress in Europe, I think, and also you started it now in San Francisco and in London. The fifth cluster is Erik as an author, did different books. The sixth cluster is him as a technician. Technician? Is it right? The word? I mean, the pronunciation. Yeah. Okay, thank you. This is something very special about Erik because he is very interested in technique, and that's why he always knows everything before other people, other designers started. I mean, this is a very old picture from, this is a very interesting story. I think you should tell the story later because it's a poor story, but it's on the other hand, it's a very important story for your life. And that was in London. I don't know exactly when it was. 77, when he brought all his maybe you can tell this later because it's good to tell it in your own words. And this is Erik with his first Apple Macintosh. And if this is true, you bought the first Macintosh in Germany as a private person, okay? So the last cluster is the person. The person shows how Spiekermann's enthusiasm for design reaches far into his private life. I mean, this doesn't have to do anything with design. It's his son, Dylan. Or maybe it's also design, is it? Kind of. Okay. And Dylan now did the translations for the book. And this is his, or Susanna's and Erik's house in Berlin. So, the clusters are indicated in the vertical text on each page margin, which is not visible on this page, but maybe here. And they have been integrated chronologically in order to show how one thing led to another. The work section begins with the first company in 1967. The year numbers are also presented vertically. They each indicate the start and the end of a project. Erik Spiekermann puts his huge output down onto his ability to keep on finding partners and colleagues to support him in his work, and with whom he normally remains on good terms as a colleague and friend. This book is also dedicated to those colleagues. Credit is given to the many people involved in collaborative works, starting on page and so on. So this is, to make it short, the structure of the book, and what I can show now are some samples. For example, on the right side you see one of this contributor texts from from Neville about Erik, or this is what Wally wrote about him. Then we have in the beginning a text about his early years, as you can see. And this is very important to know. I mean, if you read this text, you know everything about him. You know exactly why he is what he is now. And I think this is new to know this story. And you helped us with it. Thank you. My wife wrote the story, Isabel. This is another picture, as you can see, from younger years. And then we have text. This is about the split of MetaDesign. This is the Laudatio. What is this in English? Laudatio of John Waters when he got the most important German design prize, Designpreis Deutschland. And in the end, we have a part about his current life. So this is him in his workshop that he just founded, P98, where he started to combine traditional printing techniques with new digital techniques. A very important and interesting project. And then we have this, what I call 7 questions. It's about the future, what he would like to do in the future. And we have an overview about all his typefaces. And we have a list of all his colleagues helped him to do the work with short texts about these people and their web addresses. Okay, and this is finally the sketch that Christoph Niemann did on Erik. So that was the introduction. Now you know how the book works. And we could start to talk. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Need a microphone?
Yeah,
No.
there it is.
I don't need a microphone. I can speak at 96 points.
Okay, I think that maybe it's, for me it's easier just to show some pictures and you tell the stories behind it. That was my idea. And maybe you can start with this huge typeface on the cover. What is it?
It's actually a very small typeface, but it's just huge in the projection, never mind. There was one, as maybe you understood, I had nothing to do with this book except that I employed somebody to go through what little archives I have, because I had this big fire in 77 and a couple of floods, and then my ex-partner threw away all my archives, so there was very little there. And poor Inga had to spend a whole year finding stuff that was actually impossible. You see some reproductions there, stuff that was actually covered in water at one time, so some of them are really, really crappy. But the one stipulation, I kept out of the design, obviously, because you can't possibly interfere, because I was the subject, not the doer. It was all his idea, and it's all his fault. And I said, okay, the one thing I've always been wanting to do this particular typeface, based on a weight of accidents grotesque for you guys, or AG as we call it for short. There was a specific weight that only exists in very large wooden or resin letters, and I've always liked it. I showed an early specimen to Christian like decades ago, right? I said, one day I'm going to do this, and this was the opportunity. So I said to Johannes, okay, I'm going to design this typeface, one weight only, and you will only use one weight in this whole book. So of course you can use, there's 4 typefaces in there. There's a headline version which is slightly different, and there's a black one and there's an orange one. So there's already 3 typefaces in there, and a couple of sizes. So you can design a book in one typeface, which is actually we shouldn't be doing, because we're the ones who design all the hundreds of thousands of typefaces, and then I go and say do one only to prove a point. It's a little counterproductive in a way, but it works, and it takes a good designer to do so. And he brought the rhythm to those pages. And he, in fact, you requested, we did a sort of like a book version, which was a little too thin in a certain size. So we made another regular book, which you cannot really hardly tell apart. Basically, it's one typeface. But of course, I did the first fairly rough version, and Ralph Karawa, who works with me in Berlin, said, well, let's do some other weights. So he did some weights, and they will probably be published next year. There's going to be a very thin and a very... How many weights did I show you, Christian? I showed you some, didn't I? 6. Yeah, I think that's probably about 16 by now. You know, started at 10 units, go to 1,000 almost. It's silly, but you know, the tools are getting so easy these days. We work in Glyphs app, and it's very easy to do interpolation once you have good bases, of course. So that was my main contribution, because I've always thought that, especially these days on the screen, most faces are too thin. This is something to do with age, that 22-year-old designers out of school, you know, it's great to look at Helvetica ultralight at that size. By the time it gets to the iPhone, it's not that size anymore, but the kids who work in Cupertino are all like 22, fresh out of school. They usually come out of England, they're out of Clerkenwell, and they have this tradition there that you love Helvetica when you graduate. For some reason or other, I have no idea why that is. And the extra light weights, which is, you know, they're so delicate. This, like, you know, having really nice, special, spicy food. They forget that the design is for the real world. And I wanted to prove that a good text face needs to have a bit of weight. And I know Christian is with me on this, and Mike also does some hefty weights. We do the fine ones, but because we can. But when you look at decent magazines, the ones that are printed on maybe not the best paper in the universe, they need to be a little heavier. Especially as we don't have letterpress anymore. So, and I think the book proves, if you see it in 9 point or something, that it's nice to have a bit of color on a typeface. The tracking is another issue. I think we had to track it. I've since changed it. So that was it. And then we both happen to like day glow, luminous. It's one of my favorite colors, because I'm not much of a color person, as you can see. I'm very black and white. But I've always liked orange day glow. And luckily, Johannes...
Never knew before, because everybody thinks that you only work with red and yellow.
Well, I like it. I've done Dayglow, and I love it. And that's why we did this. The funny story there, well, it's not so funny. I don't think there's anybody here from Gestalten Verlag, because they spent a year on the book, and everything was kind of done. And if you see inside, there's some pages that have reversed out type, quite a few of them, reversed out of black, reversed out of images. And then the publisher suddenly said, oh, by the way, when we do the black plate change for the English version, and we said, black plate change? Because what they normally do, they print the images and then they do a black plate for German, a black plate for English. Well, you can't reverse type, and you can't have color type either. So we ended up paying for the color and the color ourselves. And Johannes wanted those holes. God knows why, so he paid for the holes. Isn't it weird that you have to pay for holes? I mean, something that isn't there, you pay for, kind of. Shouldn't you get money back for holes somehow? It's kind of like you go to the baker's and you don't buy bread. I mean, you don't pay, right? To me, I still don't get it. And those images, by the way, they were taken over 25, in 88 in Los Angeles by a photographer at Pasadena. For some reason, they came up again. I found them in some drawer.
You mean that page here?
Yeah. I had a phase where I wore a bow tie. And I wore my hair open at the time, yeah. I still wear my hair open, yes, it's true.
Okay. Let's talk a bit about the early years, because you have to know that Erik never studied communication design or graphic design. But so he's an, how do you say this, autodidact?
I'm a cheat.
So tell them how it started.
Oh God! Well, this is
Make it short.
This is also a little embarrassing. If I agreed to do this book before we had the full concept. Putting myself into this position, if I bought a book about another designer, who's, you know, I mean, being old doesn't mean you've done anything. It just means you're old. I remember Ed Bengard saying this. Somebody was saying, just because, you know, somebody says, "Oh, I've been doing this for years," insinuating that he or she must be good at it. And Ed said, just because you've been doing something for 50 years just means you've been doing it for 50 years. In other words, you could have been doing crap for 50 years. So just the fact that I'm old doesn't mean I've done anything good. It just means I've done a lot of shit. Stuff, sorry. But I would like to know where people come from, designers. You know, they just don't grow up and they're not suddenly 35 and have 7 people in the studio and 1 Nobel Prize. We all get there some way or other. And the way I got there wasn't through academia. I mean, I did go to university, but I did history of art. I didn't ever study design. I got to it from finding a printing press, literally. Well, my father found it, and I'm not never sure whether they actually found it or stole it or organized it. We called it re-socializing in those days. We put it back into society because it was in some basement or other. Resozialisierung, we call that in German. So I had this bug, and I do remember. I didn't, but when we talked about this with Johannes, who interviewed me a few times, I suddenly had this. I remembered the famous. We call this Aha-Erlebnis in German, this sort of come to Jesus moment, that I was, and I think I must have been 8 or 9, or even younger. There was a printer's lived next door to where I grew up in northern Germany, and I used to go in there and, you know, and get little cut-offs because they were great for drawing on the stuff they'd throw away. I still can't throw away paper because you can always draw on it, and the smaller the better. So I did long. My dad was a truck driver, so I did, you know, draw trucks, so I needed narrow, long paper because you have a truck and 2 trailers. Luckily, if he'd been an architect, I would have. Well, I could have turned it sideways, I guess. Anyway, so and I remember the smell of, and I know there was a linotype there with that particular sound. The matrix is falling down. There must have been a Heidelberg-Platten because everybody had a Heidelberg-Platten. There must have been a cylinder. These noises, anybody who's been into a letterpress printer, specific noise that you will never ever forget. And there's a specific smell. The smell of ink, the smell of paper, the smell of solvent, because you spend more time with solvent than you do with ink, cleaning the shit up, in other words. And I remember this guy, and it must have been a proof press or some poster press where, you know, you put the type down, the galley, whatever it was, and you ink it with rollers, and then you put a piece of paper on it, put the cylinder over it, and then he peeled it off. And I could not, and I still can't believe that this really messy piece of metal. There was probably brass, there was lead type, there was probably iron furniture. We don't have wood furniture. It's stuff you put in between the words, by the way, or the characters. And reglet and stuff looked really messy. And then ink is messy. I mean, it gets on your fingers. It takes you days to get off. But then he picked up this piece of paper, and it was this beautiful white piece of paper, just had a few black letters on it, which I could read. I thought it was, and I still think it's a miracle. How does that happen? How come you have those marks on paper? With the technology that you can actually understand. Inkjet printer, we don't know how inkjet printers work. I mean, we kind of know, but you can't look at it. If you look at it, you've destroyed it. That's how they make their money, right? If I'm curious, I look at this shit and then I have to buy another one. But that costs any money anyway because I make money on the ink. So that's that. I remember that, and I think that memory came up in our sort of therapy session, as it were. And I knew that's when the bug bit me. And I thought, this is so incredible. I want to be one of those people that can make words out of metal or whatever it was, ink. You know, grease. Ink is grease. I mean, it's not pleasant actually. And so I guess that's what that came out in conversation with Isabel, Johannes' wife, who is a professional writer. So that's my excuse. You know, I couldn't help it. I was driven to be a printer, and I was, and then I wasn't because it burned down. So there.
That's the story about this picture here. And
I'm not John Cleese, by the way. That's he's downstairs.
Where is it? So let me see. Let me find it.
Oh, God.
It's earlier, is it? It's earlier, is it?
I don't know. It's your book.
Yeah, it must be earlier. So, what happened there?
Yeah, this is in the 60s, started in the, I can't remember, like 60, whenever. When I was still at school, I had little presses, and then I bought I want to say a lorry, but a truck for you guys. From the post office, they had sort of second-hand trucks for like $100 at the time. And because this is the time when people were throwing away letterpress. I mean, they're literally chucking out the window, or into the rivers, or into the canals. I'm sure all the rivers, I'm sure the East River here is full of it. I know the Thames in London is full of it. I know some rivers in Berlin are full of metal. Because people would just chuck it out the window, because nobody would want it. And so then I got this reputation, oh, there's this weirdo, they probably called me, who's got this big truck, and he's got a couple of, well, we were in our teens, early 20s. In other words, you bought a crate of beer, and you asked your buddies, and they would come along, because they were young and stupid. And you would move this equipment, which was incredibly stupid, because the things weigh literally tons. And I'm talking about like 10 tons. The biggest press I had was 20 feet long. It's that tall. And we took it apart. We took out the windows in the building, and took the press downstairs with sort of block and tackle, drove off, and weeks later I remember, shit, we didn't put the windows back in. To this day, I'm embarrassed about it. I have no idea what happened. I mean, obviously somebody put the windows back in. The printer's way gone. Obviously, they moved out. And so I had, over time, this enormous amount of equipment, which was put in people's basements. And Berlin, I mean, Berlin in the 60s and early 70s was a very messy place. Messy in the sense that nothing cost anything. I had a very cheap workshop that I never paid rent for because nobody ever came to collect it. I signed a contract with some sort of guy there, and he said, oh, it's going to be 1 mark a square meter. And I said, fine. And I moved out 2 years later. I never paid a penny because nobody came to collect. So that was fine. So it was, it was very, very, very primitive. And the only people in Berlin, other than the native Berliners who nobody knew, but the sales girls, I guess, and the butchers were native Berliners, but everybody else was a draft refugees like I was. Berlin at the time was, surrounded by the Russian sector, and there was no draft. We still had draft in Germany until a couple of years ago. So if you went to Berlin, like you guys used to go to Canada, you wouldn't have to serve in any army of sorts. So I was one of those bright guys who, instead of, I thought Germans had worn enough hard hats, so I moved to Berlin, and everybody else moved there, so all the cool kids were there. It was kind of like Brooklyn today, in a way. They all had beards and didn't serve in the army. So anyway, then at some point, my then wife was English. For various reasons, we decided to move to London. We moved in 73, and then 3 years later, I decided to bring my print shop, which had been stored all over the place, as I said. So I rented this. Actually, it was a friend had a band, and they had this gigantic articulated truck, which I drove over full of my equipment, parked it at a railway arch in West London, in Ledborough Grove, 2 railway arches, and we went for vacation. And we came back, and the place had burned. Somebody was welding on cars next door, on a Fassel Vega, if anybody knows Fassel Vegas, really cool French cars of the 60s, and Jaguars, and they hadn't watched it, and the place burned down. It took 2 days to distinguish the fire. Because I'm talking about like paper, ink, wooden furniture, wrecks. That stuff burns like cinder. It was an incredible fire. The railway that went over the railway had to stop. I read the reports in the papers because the fire was so huge. So I came back to, and then what do you do when you're a printer with no kit? You're a designer, right? So all you need is a pencil. I knew how to do this shit, but I didn't have any equipment. So then I had a pencil. So
that was the moment you met Wally?
No, that was, the same year. Then I was suddenly out of work. And I wrote this, I had a friend, Ed Cleary, who died 20 years ago, who went to Canada. And I was working as a typesetter in London, on night shifts mostly. And I wrote this sort of little, I think it's in the book also, this little card offering my services that has that German-English postcard in it. It's a very ugly flag. The Union Jack in black, red, and yellow. It's really ugly.
I can't translate it. It was very. I think it was very funny what you wrote. In Germany, it's Pingeliger Deutscher sucht.
Yeah. My reputation was because I worked at night shifts at these typesetters. We're talking about photo setting here in the mid 70s. High time for ITC, for example, and I was pretty good at it. And because I'd done some workshop with Berthold in Germany, who were making the most expensive and probably the most precise equipment at the time. And I introduced artwork using positive film as opposed to here. People to this, even to like yesterday, you were using paper. So we made paper artwork, you know, cow gum, stuff which was very imprecise for a German. So we did film instead, which is transparent, so you can see what you're actually doing. You put it over a grid, wrong reading film, we did, and then you did right reading plates to get wrong, never mind, rubber blankets and all the rest. I think I'm going above your heads here. So I was the precision guy in London, and so I was looking for some real work, and Ed wrote this copy, and I sent out these cards to 50 people, and the next day I got a call from Wally Orlins, who passed away a few months ago only. Offered me a job at Wolf Orlins, whom you all know, I'm sure, in London at the time only. They had like 60, 70 people and lots of German clients. And some of them couldn't communicate with their German clients, because the German clients spoke German and the Brits spoke English. And at the time, not everybody spoke English like today, unlike today. So I became the gopher, I guess, in between the German clients and Wolf Orlins. And right, Mike? He was at Wolf Orlins, and it's still a good outfit. And it was the biggest, and they were the first people back in '77 who had a color copier. And anybody of you who is older than 40 knows that having a color copier in '77 was like having your private nuclear reactor in the basement. It was like, wow. I mean, it broke. I mean, I think it had a little hook on the side for the hammock for the mechanic, because he lived there essentially. I mean, but somehow it was rung Xerox, and it was the size of a battleship, almost the size of my first press. And the guy was there all the time, but it was their prestige thing. Wolf Orlins were a prestigious agency, so they gave us this printer. And you would go into the clients with color printout in A3, whatever that is, 1117, and it would be like, you know, the glass beads for the Native Americans, I guess, the Indians. They would like think you were from Mars, you know. My God, this is color. They would pass around. I had the same effect when. After German reunification in 1990, where we had a client in East Germany, and we went there with color prints, which by that time in the West everybody had, and they thought again we were from Mars. And look at these guys from the West, they have color prints, which was like, you know, amazing. And they have a machine that does them, and it's on ordinary paper, and it only takes a minute.
Eric, that's not fair.
It's true though.
Talking about our East German brothers and sisters. They
were a little behind in technology,
okay.
That's all I'm saying. You know, so it was like having gunpowder, and you know. Anyway, so that was the end of my honors, and you go to the back of the book. We're back in letterpress country now. We have a large studio with, and again, people are now calling and saying, "Oh, by the way, I heard you collect machines." I don't collect machines. We have machines. We have this press sitting here. Would you go? So now we're looking for bigger space. And I found the same press that I had at the time, 10 tons.
That was the postcard you sent out when you went to London.
This is one thing I have to say. This is something that Johannes would do that I would never do, because I'm such a timid typographic designer. Johannes, being a proper and one of the best in Germany editorial designer, he would take a postcard, take the print, make a photograph of it, and blow it up to a spread in this size. It looks, you know, warts and all. It's horrible. It's out of, you know, it's artwork. It's printed. He's done that a couple of times. The business card up to I would never do that, because I'm such a faithful mechanical German. A business card, you know, full same size. But he blows shit up. It's great. I think it works. But I think, oh my God, you know, you can't do that. Of course you can, but I can't. He can. There's a difference between a typographic designer and a graphic designer, I think.
So in that time when you was in London, I think that was the time you decided to establish also a huge design studio in Germany, because you realized that working with this kind of little design studios that was normal in that times in Germany is not useful for bigger companies.
Well, at Wolf Orlins, like I said, I looked after some major German clients, Audi and VW being one of them, and we didn't have the German tradition is very much the craftsman tradition. We had the typical, I guess you guys would call it mom and pop shop. You know, he did the design, she wrote the invoices, kind of thing. There were 2 or 3 people. There was the biggest studio at the time in the late 70s had 6 people in Germany. and they worked for the Olympics in '72, and they stayed together. There was no big shops. And I learned at Wolf Owners they can have 60, 70 people, which will get you the big clients, which means you can do big jobs, which means you can actually do something that everybody will see rather than just doing record covers or book covers or whatever. And and I got my first project from Wolf Owners. There was a German bank that they just couldn't handle, so they said, why don't you take this over, the implementation? Because the Brits, you know, sorry, Graham, were never very good at getting shit done. They were good at great concepts, but then, you know, printing, I don't know, it's too precise. Yeah, let's go to the pub and say, mate, you know, they'll pass it on to me. Off to the pub I went, there's Spiekermann, you know, the German, getting shit done. So I got the first project from Wolf Owners, and then for 2 years I commuted between Berlin and London before I decided to settle in Berlin again. Yeah, so, and then MetaDesign quickly became the biggest studio in Germany.
So an interesting story is maybe the birth of Meta, which also started with a job for MetaDesign for the German Post.
Yeah, that was the second one, yeah.
I think it's that here.
Yeah.
So I think this job is able to understand, now my English completely breaks down. Maybe you can tell us something about the birth of Meta as a corporate identity typeface for the Post instead of a new logo or something else that is normally used for identities. Or this was the birth of your idea, taking typefaces as the most important parts of corporate identities?
Well, if there's some people here old enough to remember the 70s, maybe. If you today, actually, the American post office is a great example because it's one of the crummiest design outfits ever. It is embarrassingly bad. It really embarrasses me at times, and so does their service, for that matter. Well, thus UPS and FedEx. That wouldn't exist if you had a decent post office. We got this job, and it was the weirdest thing. These people must have written to a couple of people. Saying, oh, well, you need a new, at the time it was called, well, I guess corporate identity, even though it's Erscheinungsbild in German, an appearance. And would you please, as an example of your capability, design us a business card and a letterhead? I mean, this is a company that had 300,000 employees, for Christ's sake. The National German Post Office. A letterhead and a business card? According to DIN rules, because there are DIN rules for for letterheads and business cards. So basically, it took 10 minutes to take Helvetica and put the stuff in position, send it in there, and we got the job. I have no idea. I still think this is weird. And the guy was the client, great old guy Heinrich Graf, a Waterbury, so he finds himself as an artist. And something I must have said or done they liked anyway. So we went there and he said, okay, we need a new logo. Basically, what they said. They had the old post horn there, you know, with the old signal, and they wanted a new one, and that's all they wanted. And of course, their house face was Helvetica, which everybody had. Of course, when I counted, they used about 25 different typefaces. As if they didn't have serifs on it, it was called Helvetica, essentially. Well, this is also the 70s when printers wouldn't invest in a font cost $800 a weight, so you wouldn't buy more than one a year. So they cheated. It's kind of good enough, a bit like today, in a way. And I said, wait a minute, but the interface, I probably didn't use the word because it didn't exist, between you and the public is mostly forms, because you hand in letters. You used to pay lots of money. This is before online stuff. You would go in there and pay your bills at the post office. I think you still do here, and you would have we still don't have checkbooks anymore in Germany, but then we had checkbooks, and everybody had a checking account with the post office, and you would get your social security from the post office. Basically, it was the biggest interface with the administration, with the government, and everything. So their forms were incredibly important, and they would print 5 million forms a month or a week or whatever. It was insane. So I said, let's design the forms. And of course, when you look at Helvetica, and that hasn't changed, it's not a good typeface for forms in 7.8 point. Takes too much space, it has no personality. So I said, let's design it. Well, and then we researched. We looked at 20 typefaces, including News Gothic, Syntax, and a few others, and really had a checklist saying, is it legible at small size? Can it be printed on bad paper? Because that's one of the conditions at the time for forms. In millions. Is it legible for old people in small sizes? Does it take not so much space, because then the form can go from 2 to 1 page maybe. So all and nothing fitted this. And I had no intention of designing a typeface. I mean, if you think I was 30 at the time, or 32 or something, to design a typeface for then the biggest company in Germany or even Europe was like, I wouldn't have dared even ask, because it was just too big a job. It was, but then we analyzed it and said, well, shit, there isn't anything out there. So we made some sketches. I made some really soft paper, soft pencil sketches. This is actually one by somebody at Wolf, or Sedley Place, which is Wolf Orden's offshoot, from my rough sketches, kind of artworkish. And then we had a font made, literally a physical font made at Stempel in Frankfurt. And this is 85, just as the Mac came out. So we had this font made, we set some samples, and I saw my first Macintosh in the summer of 85.
And I think you knew Icarus, right?
Yeah. It was digitized using the Icarus method, which some of you here may remember. You plot outlines on it. I still have a plotter at home to do that. Some of you might have worked with this. So it was digital. I mean, it was outlines were plotted. And I saw the Macintosh at Stempel, which is the Linotype's design studio at the time, the foundry for Linotype. And I borrowed the Macintosh because you could take it, and I took it on the train to Bonn, 100 miles away, and put it on the desk and said, okay guys, this is the new type is in here. And they looked at me and said, this Spiekermann guy, he's like totally now, type in there, look at the size of it, and I got a diskette from my pocket, said, it's on here. I said, come on, we know type, it's this big metal shit that is in trucks and in trays, and it's heavy, and people break their backs moving it around. Yeah, we have heard about photo setting means negatives, and they also have a certain size. They just thought I was totally crazy. Well, which I was, because in 85 Macintosh, like, people thought you were from Moon. And so they said, well, very nice typeface, thank you very much. We will carry on with Helvetica, because every printer has it. They didn't understand that you could send a disk to people, that PostScript was invented. I didn't even start explaining PostScript to them. I mean, how can you explain a page description language to people in that sort of environment? Maybe I should have done. But then, so it was not used. That was one. Actually, there was 2 weights of it. We did it like a headline weight with some of the trimmings off. And then it lay dormant for 4 years. And then in 89 or 88, Peter von Brockland had designed Mac Icarus. Anybody remembers Mac Icarus? Peter von Brockland, the older brother of Erik von Brockland, brilliant designer and programmer. So we took the original drawing and redigitized it in Mac Icarus. So we had a Mac font suddenly, which didn't exist before. So Meta existed as a typeface, and then I named it Meta for my studio. Before it was called PT, as in post tech type or something, PT55 for the weight. So Meta was the result of a rejection. It was something that the client threw away. I think they paid for it. They paid for the development, and it had all-style figures, and it was kind of weird. And I think it was the first kind of alternative sans at the time, probably. I mean, there was syntax and other typefaces before, obviously, but none of those were digital. So I was very lucky to have something rejected that then became a very successful typeface, because it was at the right place at the right time. Mm-hmm. And of course, I happened to have Font Shop, which we started in '88, so I had distribution. And Meta was the first exclusive I think we had, pretty much. So it's, if I'd done it 5 years later, I would have never got anywhere, probably. It's also very rough. It still is. I think Christian might have looked at some of the data. You don't want to look closely. It's messy. Right? I mean, half a dozen people, Lucas did a couple of weights. I don't know. Did you ever do any work on Meta? Display. Oh, you did the display, of course, yeah. And then there was a condensed. So everybody had a go at it, and we keep going back. And it's incongruous and messy, but I think it's some of the charm. It's kind of like letterpress. It's not perfect. A bit like me, really.
Font Shop was your idea?
Yeah.
Originally? Okay. When did you start it?
Actually, this is a good story for the TDC, because I met the ITC guys in '76 at an ATAPI meeting. This was an ITC for some of the younger kids, up to the Macintosh, up to PostScript, You bought fonts for a specific piece of equipment. You spent $500,000 on a photo setting machine, and you would buy that company's fonts, and they would be like 1,000 a weight or something. So you had Berthold equipment, you were stuck with Berthold fonts. You had Linotype, you stuck with Linotype. And IDC were the first sort of independent people who supplied artwork to all these foundries, manufacturers, who would then make their fonts with ITC artwork. In the case of Berthold, they actually redrew it because it was from New York. It was kind of cool, but a little messy on the outlines. So I met all the ITC guys, Aaron Burns and Ed Bengard, and all these, really, really great characters. They knew their stuff. This was Madison Avenue and New York advertising. These people knew type. Everything was too tightly, tight not touching, it was called, but it was. And large exiles, you all remember this stuff, ITC Garamond and Bengard. But and then I did some consulting with ITC. I did all the specimen work for Berthold from the late 70s. I did work for Linotype, for Monotype, for Autologic, all these companies that don't even exist anymore. So I thought suddenly, wait a minute, in the 80s when type went on a disc, I used to come back from visiting Adobe or ITC, and all my buddies would say, did you bring some fresh fonts? It was really like fresh, even things like Clarendon were considered fresh. And that was the first one I ever bought, I remember. So I thought, wait a minute, there's a business here. I know where the fonts come from, and those guys want them, but this is before online again. So we opened a mail order company, I guess. And because I knew all these people, we got a warehouse full of fonts without paying for them up front. So I had 2 each, PC and Mac, of the Monotype library, Linotype library, Adobe library, and Berthold library. So we had about 800 fonts, which is a lot at the time, in our cellar downstairs from my studio. And we were the first worldwide, the first font distributor, I guess, because everybody just, again, had only their fonts, and we had them all. It was easy. It was obvious. It was, just what I wanted. So I guess if I wanted it, everybody else wants it. That's Neville, yeah. And then Neville came around, who I'd known for a while as a student at LCP and stuff. And we decided, well, he had some type design. Some of them he published with Linotype, and some he didn't. That was all classical, paper artwork. And I said, somebody needs to publish this stuff. And we said, well, why don't we do it? And I also, by that time, had Dutch interns. Some people here might know Erik van Blokker and Just van Rossum, the Letterer twins, who were totally and utterly crazy. They hacked PostScript and random faces, and they built a driver for a Canon printer, where Canon said, no, it's not a printer, it's a copier. And they said, no, it's a printer. They said, no, it's a copier. And they made it a printer. They hacked their own driver, and we sold their own cables. It was crazy. So those guys had been doing fonts. And then we know Martin Maillot and a couple, there's all Dutch guys. So our first release was Dutch typefaces, because the Dutch had been making digital because of Erik and Peter van Blokland and stuff. And that was the label. And then we called it, because the place was called Font Shop, we called it Font. Looking back, not a very good branding idea, but it stuck. And Neville did that FF logo, which looks like the Fendi logo, but we didn't know at the time. Maybe they didn't know either.
I think he should.
And so the two of us were, I guess these days you call it curators. And I had dinner with Tobias Frey-Jones on Sunday, and we published his first typeface. And he was a student, he was 20, still at RISD, and he gave us Dolores, which was a total mess. It was like the worst data we'd ever seen. It had no spacing, it was all over the place, but it was great, it had this energy. And so we published that. And everybody then, the word spread pretty quickly. Oh, you're the guys, and you wouldn't believe the early data you got, or artwork from people, but there was no standard. When did you come to Berlin, Elizabeth? I can't forget. 94, 96? Also, yeah. Then we started having these people who were sort of fonty guys from all over the world, because I was friends with Roger Black and David Berlow and stuff, so the whole font world, I should say type world. When were you there, Christian? Also 99, that late, yeah. So everybody here worked on me, yeah. Mike worked with MetaDesign, in San Francisco, mind you. So anybody else here? Any more alumni? No, not really. Oh, Susanna, of course, worked there in the 90s. So there. So basically, I've always done what I wanted to do, and other people found it interesting, I guess.
Where have you been when the wall fell down?
Yeah, we were in Berlin, and this is the 9th of November, '89. And I didn't even know about it. I didn't watch TV that evening. And I got on the 10th in the morning, because I don't know if anybody here remembers this. Well, of course you don't. The East Germans wanted to get out. They've been getting out through Hungary, through Austria, around the back, and basically they hadn't hardly any people left. All the skilled workers had gone. So they bent to pressure, bowed to pressure, and opened one of the border controls into West Berlin. And then everybody just ran over. And it was obviously big news, but I hadn't been watching TV, so I came downstairs at 7 in the morning to pick up my papers, and there was 2 guys on the doorstep, my only 2 East German friends, because I couldn't get over very easily. And I said, "What the hell are you doing? Did you run away?" And they said, "No, the wall's on." I said, "Yeah, and the Pope's a Catholic and all the rest of it." I know. I just didn't believe it, because I would have sworn. They said, "No, the wall's gone." Well, it wasn't gone, but it was open. And then everybody started arriving at the studio, Justin, Erik, and everybody else, and we went over to the water, Brandenburg Gate, and the rest is, I don't know, champagne and forgotten. We just danced on the wall, and that was the end of the Cold War, as some people may know, the beginning of a totally new era. And I was there. It was pretty cool.
Okay, let's see.
And then, of course, everybody came over, including Neville, with little hammers to chisel pieces from the wall. With this plastic bag and a hammer inside it. It was very funny. What are you going for?
I don't know. I'm just switching through it and see what is maybe worth to talk about.
Oh, maybe it's enough.
Maybe it's enough. This is an interesting
How much time
picture.
do we have, Karen?
What happened there?
Oh yeah, this is. I've always liked. I still think books should be small and it should be read. Read. Sorry. I can't make that pun in German. Rote Bücher. I've always published little red books, a few of them over time, because I think they are, And when we celebrated 25th anniversary of MetaDesign, I was out by that time already. Some of the ex-guys got together, this is Jens Kreitmeier, who worked with us for a long time, and found this image of apparently it's a school for the deaf in Beijing, and put my picture into Mao's picture and made it as a poster. We had a sort of a party, and I took it home, and I thought really nice. And then the next morning I realized, shit, that's me in the picture. Well, the thing is, Mao said, you see what you expect to see, and I wasn't used to myself with dark hair, or hair for that matter. So it was a really great idea. Basically, these are all the meta designers holding up the red books. The Mao Bible, as some of your older ones. It's amazing how much you have to explain to younger people, right? We know what a Mao Bible is. They don't know what a Mao. They don't even know who Mao Zedong was. Probably.
I think they could explain the different things. So.
Yeah. Red books. I still like red books.
Okay, let's come to an end.
By the way, I'm back at The Economist. I'm redesigning The Economist once again. How cool is that after 15 years?
Okay, let's come to the present. Maybe you can talk about your
my God. That would make him dizzy.
Bicycles? No, okay. Okay. So what are your plans for the future?
Changes, but well, the first thing is, part of it is making good on having a major fire destroying. At the time, I didn't think it was so traumatic because I was young and stupid. I guess I just thought, oh, whatever, machines are gone, let's do something else. But looking back now, a lot of people would have needed a lot of therapy to get over that, having a fire destroy your livelihood and everything you've been collected. But at the time, I don't know, I was young and stupid maybe. But now I realize how much I miss it. And of course, then there's also, starting in America, in the US I should say, the trend to go back to letterpress. It's even become a verb, letterpressing. To letterpress, which of course is rubbish. It means squeezing it into the paper until it squeaks, which is what I learned to avoid. For us, it was to kiss the paper. if it made an impression, because it would destroy the type, and metal type was really expensive. So if you squeezed it, you would, your boss would, and I got hit around the ears because I destroyed type. You would use Bodoni 9-point on a Heidelberg. You'd use it once, and you'd have to buy more type, and type was really expensive, still is. So anyway, so I had to go back to this, and I've always liked the fact that I laugh when web designers come and say, oh, Did you know we use grids these days? I think, yeah, right. Grids, great invention. Gutenberg used a fucking grid. I mean, typography is a grid by definition because you have to go in multiples. You can't have half sizes, and you can't change sizes. You have 12 point or 11, well, 11 point is rare. Basically, it goes up in 12s, right? I mean, who has 11 point for Christ's sake? Or even, you know, so I have 8, 10, 12. 10 is already rare. So, which you cast it on 12, so it's easier again. It's all about multiples and dividers, because you do it in your head. The same in photo setting, even though we went metric in Germany for a while, but we're back with pixels and points. So, and we're back using grids, and metal type is a grid by definition. So to actually touch the space in between is a great experience, and the people we have over there for workshops usually come from an online background, and you can't get them out at night. They want to stay another night, they want to sleep there and touch it up. Partly is nostalgia, partly is the same feeling that I had. Oh my God, look at this. I'm making this messy stuff from old wooden type, and I print, and it's black on white, and it's pretty, and the people just love it. So it's partly that sort of bit like a holiday camp for digital designers in a way, a bit of therapy, but also you suddenly realize, oh, wait a minute, type is actually something that is tangible. Most of you are so used to typing intangible. It's on screen, you have no read, you don't know where it comes from. You install a font and it has sort of pixels, and as soon as I say anti-aliasing, your eyes glaze over already, let alone, you know, what it takes to design it. I mean, they look perfectly normal, these type designers here in the first borough, but you know, they can't be normal because they spend days pushing outlines and pixels and shit. That's not normal. It's not what people are born to do. I mean, let's face it, it's very nerdy exercise because we're talking about, you know, 600 glyphs per one weight. And then we're talking about 9 weights these days, right? So we're talking about 5,000 glyphs that somebody has to push, which is very, very scary. But metal is kind of like, and you can't, there's no kerning. I mean, there is kerning, but, you know, hacksaw. So you don't bother. So you track or you don't track. You just leave it. I have this poster that I printed that's called Move Fast and Get Shit Done. Well, I was going to be stuff done, but I only had 2 Fs. So, you know, you rewrite your copy because the typeface that I want. So it's that sort of, like Susanna said in one of the movies we have, you know, there are constraints, and constraints are refreshing. I mean, if you open your fridge and you've got flour and eggs, you know, you can make bread or a cake. But you can't make broccoli, you know, it's just, but it's there, you make whatever is there, and that often is refreshing, if you have a few choices at least. And everybody who has a digital presence finds that refreshing to not have any choices. They say, oh, have you got 11.5 point? I said, no, we got 12 point. And if it doesn't fit, go to the next size, and we may not have 14. In fact, we don't have 14. You have to go to 24 and just make do, and that's refreshing. But also, the other, and that's becoming more relevant now, there's a few professions that are pretty much dying out. I mean, there are no more real typesetters, as in compositors. That craft has gone, and it's a use for craft. You know, you doing HTML is basically what a typesetter does. And there's no, in Germany, there's only one guy who still casts type, and he's my age, so in other words, he's ready to retire. There's a few people in the States that still cast type. Now, casting metal type is not useful. Nobody wants to print book from metal type. It's rubbish. But the technology that led to it is brought us civilization. I mean, Gutenberg's invention of movable type and what came out of it is a major historical development. And to lose the ability to use those machines and to understand how they work, I think would be a very, very, very much a cultural loss. It's like we would suddenly not be able to write anymore, or not write with pens anymore. It's something that I think is worth preserving. And it's not, I'm not being conservative. It's a cultural achievement that we need to look after. And those machines that we have won't ever break. They're heavy enough, but the people who can't, I'm one of the few people who can still set type in our space. And you know, we have to mend those machines. So one of our aims is to train people on the machines, to use them again. You have people here, you know, the Brooklynites do letterpress, but they do it from nylon, from polymer, which is kind of like wimpish. But it's okay, we do that also. We are 3D printing letters, large letters. We are milling them, routing them. We're making silicone casts from existing type. We're using digital methods. I'm not against digital at all, that would be stupid. But trying to marry the making, the physical making with the digital invention is what we're trying to do. You know, maybe there is a place for letterpress. Maybe it's only in education. Maybe it's only in appreciation of the history or of the material part of type. Maybe I don't think there's a commercial thing there. But I'm gathering a couple of friends in Berlin, and we have between us we have so much type you would not believe. And to see that wood or metal type, just to see it and work with it is just great fun. It's a revelation for all of you, I dare say, even though it's not commercial, it's not practical. So that's what we do, and I have no idea who's going to pay for it, because it's expensive, so we may have to go and get some Arts Council money or whatever, subsidies. But we have to move into a bigger space now, because there's more machines out there. And they are cool machines. Just they're fucking heavy. But also one thing, you see, every man, I'm saying man, you have two choices. You either have a lawnmower that you sit on and drive around the yard, or you have a pallet truck. A man has that, and I have a pallet truck. You know what they are? These guys you put under the machines and pump up and move around. I think every man has to have one, and it's taken me 65 years to get one. I can move 2 tons of machinery around, effortless. Brilliant. I love it.
No more questions. I don't have any questions anymore. So
I'm not surprised. Anybody?
I asked so many questions in the last few years.
Is it getting too warm here?
But maybe you have some questions. This is what Matteo told me to make a Q&A, if you like to.
Show passed on the screen. What happened to their packaging? What did they do?
This would be very difficult. Show is the chocolate company that Susanna designed the packaging for, and we did the logo and everything way back. When was it, Susanna? It's 6, 7, 8 years ago. Yeah, you're right. It was very.
Seems lovely.
It was great, yeah. And then marketing took over, and they made more product and more product and more product and diversified. Some of it has gone back. The management has changed. And now there's fewer products, but I think it's the same old story. You know, a company, you do something from the beginning, and it's kind of, I wouldn't say rigid, but there's a direction, and then you add stuff, and you lose the direction because they couldn't afford to pay us anymore because the company never made any money, and that was actually a concept. The concept was, patterns as on money, backgrounds, goyoshis as they're called, and you could. Well, you haven't seen the milk chocolate. I mean, Susanna pushed it into digital patterns. It works, but yeah, that happens to clients sometimes. We still get free chocolate if you want to.
Earlier in the introduction, they spoke of your split with Meta, and they said if I go in, they shoot me. What kind of?
No, they wouldn't. No, it's not. That's over. But we had a.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, so yeah, with the split with Meta. I started MetaDesign, as you heard, in '79, and I had a major disagreement with my 2 partners who I brought on later, who now go around saying they started it. It's just the typical thing. We were all probably immature. I have as much I'm as much to blame as anybody else. We just moved in different directions. I am very chaotic. I don't like organization, and I hire people because I like them. And I don't make plans and schedules, and I don't like hierarchies. It worked. I mean, we had 200 people, but my partners, and we have a similar issue right now at Erik Spiekermann always. So most people need a structure. They think everybody needs a structure. Nobody needs it. You need work. You need coffee and water and electricity and central heating and jobs. And I bring in the jobs, and people do them. But certain people just need to, manage and have hierarchies and responsibilities in departments and stuff. Departments makes people apart. That's why I don't like departments. But this sort of chaotic or anarchistic way of running a company is not everybody's taste. So we split up. And we split up badly, and they threw away my archives, 2 branches full of shit, and took over. I did the finance for that building. I got the architect for that. There's a major building, an old power station. And I didn't get credit for it, so that kind of hurt. And then I tried to go to an event after they moved into the building, and they asked me not to come. And now now they're going around, the present owners now say they started the company in 1990. Well, I started in '79, and I have it on record. So if I go in there, then the truth will come out. So they have to avoid me, because their story will suddenly be false, right? It's very much like some marriages that go wrong, and then you start hating your ex-partner, even though you loved each other at one time. So basically, that burned my socks in a way, kind of, you know. Get rid of everything that was my trace. Well, of course, I met him there. I met a lot of people there, and half of the people I work with now were at Meta at one time, because it was the best and biggest German agency for a long time. Now the work's kind of corporate as everything else.
It's still the biggest, isn't it?
It's still the biggest, yeah. But big, as we know, and it's very organized, you know, which means it's very boring. They have departments and managers and sub-managers and assistants and all the shit that nobody needs. You throw out half the people and the work gets better. There's nothing like pressure. I mean, if you go, you know, I'm not saying you should stay late at night. I think if you stay later than 7, your business model sucks. But having more work that you can handle is always good. If you have not enough work, people, you know, the timesheets are always full. You always have 8 hours when you fill out your timesheets, miraculously, always. Whatever you do all day, you always manage to find something that you did between 2 and 5. So timesheets, forget them. I mean, they're poetry. You know, they're made up. I've never believed in them. I don't believe in controlling either. You know, you count your money in the evening, and if you have more than you had in the morning, you made money. But I have realized that's not a sustainable model for running a big company. So I'm out of it now. I'm on the board. What happened to Bundespost?
Still exists.
Well, it's not called Bundespost anymore.
Oh, never changed.
They revolutionized their corporate identity. They went from Helvetica to Frutiger 10 years ago, which is progress. Come on, but it's kind of, you know, it's still yellow. But they're still an institution. They're not as big as they were, because they split up the telephone. When I worked for them, they had telephone, post, and the third one. Banking, yeah. Thank you. They all belong together. Now they've all the usual privatization shit, you know. One guy does letters, the other one does money, the other one does telephones.
Can you tell us a little bit about your book library at home? The 6-meter high book library.
Well, it's a little stupid. I mean, like I said, when we I didn't say that. I said this earlier today. I didn't realize how many books I had until we moved to this new house. And I wanted them, well, and I'm talking about books that you use for work, like type specimen books and reference books, the sort of stuff that we all have around. I wanted them close to my desk. And we have this space in the front of the building. It's a very narrow, tall house. It's 7 floors tall, but it's very narrow. It's what, 6.5 meters, whatever, 21 feet wide. I can't believe I have to do this in bloody feet here. So the front of that, where we work downstairs, and there's a bit of there's an airspace, and so the only way to put the books in there was to make this shelf that's 6 meters tall. That's 20 feet for you, and when there's a little seat that you sit in, you hoist yourself up, but you hardly ever go up there, because most of the books I need I can get by stepping on a stool. The stuff up there is the stuff that I've got to be 130 by the time I read it, because nobody needs that many books. It's ridiculous. But the formula is like bicycles. You always, n+1 is the formula. You always need one more. I mean, and then the books arrive. I mean, I don't buy that many, but people send me books, or I write forwards. Often then I get a specimen, and I don't know. There was always new books there, and we really have run out of space. There's in the cellar, they're over at the workshop now. Yeah, and then somebody makes them. It's ridiculous. But books are great, because they are they're also very good insulation, both against sound and cold. It's true. And you have stuff like Steve here. I should introduce Steve Kröter, who does the great Designers and Books website, a great service. Where designers, how many are there now, Steve? How many?
Over 200.
200 designers have given their book lists, between half a dozen, kind of 3 or 5 or 6.
At least 5.
It's a useful resource, because you see what other designers read. You discover, oh my God, I should have. Well, the trouble is, I should have this, because if Michael Barrow reads it, I should read it. But it's useful, because how else? It's like Twitter. How else would you find out about stuff if you didn't follow somebody who you appreciate and like, and the same goes with books. That website is a really great resource. I go there all the time to see, what does Debbie Millman read. It's interesting, and sometimes I think, what? But sometimes you think, oh wow, I need to have this. Scary, but that's N+1. Yeah, same like bicycles, music, books. Always need one more. Oh, I don't think I have one ebook. I do. I mean, I think if I don't read very much fiction. I read my old books over and over, the classics. But if I wanted a pocket book like fiction, I would probably get an ebook these days because I might as well. But most of my books are reference books. Collections, old stuff, new stuff. I have all these friends who've written books, who design books. I've got to have them all. And books they're all nice. They smell good. And you can put them under your screen. Which is a lot of people use books for these days, Because I don't know why Apple makes those screens so low. Everybody has. And now we don't have telephone books anymore, so now we have to. This book is good. 3 of them will make a good screen stand. Yeah, or 2, the German and the English version. I would probably do it.
More for sale.
By the way, I have no shares in this. I mean, I'm just the subject. So we don't earn money on this, so whatever. If I have to, yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the BPG project, how that came about?
What do you know all this shit? I know you do. I know you
I
do.
read the book. It's right in front of me.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Well, the that's the Berlin Transit, which you referred to. Well, sometimes, I mean, it's nice to design the identity for a national institution like the post office, obviously. It's also nice to design, like I did the stuff for the German railways with the help of Christian, the typeface, and we did all the literature. It's nice to sort of travel and find your own stuff, especially because nobody knows it, that you did it. I got kicks out of that. BVG, Berlin Transit, was a great story because it was political, because there was 2 Berlins with a wall in between. And when the wall came down, the guys in the east didn't know the west and vice versa. It was very much like if you'd put a wall between, or you have a water between Brooklyn and Manhattan. But if they couldn't come to either side, then if that wall went away or they built a bridge, you say, wait a minute, how do we get to Williamsburg? And they didn't have maps. So in 1990, shortly after the wall was open, it didn't fall, it was opened. They came to us saying we need an information system, which is also. At the time, the word corporate design was verboten because they had previously paid some guy a shitload of money to come up with a stupid design. They wanted to make everything white buses, white trams. I mean, that's, in a dirty place, it was total rubbish. It really was rubbish. So the word was, you couldn't mention the word. So we did passenger information instead. But by definition, the passenger information is the identity of a place like transit. So we did the maps, we did the bus stops, we did the trams, the cars. My favorite thing is that I've contributed to at least Berlin, if not German culture, is the fact that all the vehicles they have, buses, trams, metro, subways, are all yellow. They were all different colors before, and they were messy. And I take great pride in the fact that you recognize Berlin. And the interesting thing is that maybe you're referring to this. I don't usually go after clients. They're kind of like, people, and over time they become your client. If you kind of like keep in the neighborhood, not get on their nerves, not sort of sell, but not disappear either. And that's a little bit of an art. In this case, I had pursued it because I would use the Uber and the metro every day, pretty much, and it was disgusting. It was really, everybody drove, who could afford to had a car. Even the people who worked for them, they had they had free tickets. The people who worked for the transit, but their parking lot outside the building was covered in Mercedes and Audis, because I said, we don't use the metro. It was kind of like for the working, the Turks, the immigrants, the working class. Here will be for the Hispanics, I guess. If I may say that. Basically, the people who do the dirty work for us, they used the metro. The real Berliners didn't. And it looked horrible. It was, the letters were falling off the wall and stuff. So we actually went and designed a system for them and printed it in a brochure, which cost a shitload of money, properly printed 50 or, at the time, this was before digital printing. This was proper printed on a large Heidelberg. And they laughed me out of the building and said, we don't need this stuff, And the great, I think it's a great sentence, the guy said to me, And I said, how do you know your system doesn't works? He said, well, when we close our stations at 1 o'clock in the morning, nobody's left. So they all find home. That was their proof. There weren't any people like on the platform saying, oh my God, you know, how do I go home? They all were gone, so the system worked. Kind of true in a way, you know. I mean, nobody died. Nobody lost their, I mean, people lost their way, but by that time, by 1 o'clock in the morning, they're all gone. So what can you say to that? You know, like, okay, I guess it works, kind of. It worked, but it was horrible. And to this day, I'm very happy that because the war came down, they had to come to us. They hated me. They threw me out the window. They wrote me letters saying, please do not come and visit us again, ever. And then they had a new management, and then they called us because we were the only people in town who could do it. By that time, we had like 40 people, and nobody else could do it. It was a big job. It had to be done very quickly, and we were competent. And they had to bite the bullet. And that was great. I mean, it was so nice to watch, and they say, okay, guys, I told you so. Now, of course, we had the system ready. In my head, it was ready. And that was it's pretty good. And it's nice to, you know, go there and even though it's 25 years and it should be redone, but, you know, the timetables are still legible. The signage is still okay-ish. It could be better, but it's aged fairly well. But like all the systems, you need to go in there every 5 years even and look if it still works. I'm not saying aesthetically, but things have changed. They've added stations, they've added lines, they've added tariffs. They even have touch screens of sorts. So you need to go back. They have apps. So one should really go back in there. But it's that, I think for a designer, the most rewarding thing is to do something that is both useful and not so bad looking. If you've seen the stuff before, it was really, you had to go in there and close your eyes. It was so ugly and useless. So that's probably it's my favorite project, because I see it every day when I'm in Berlin, that is.
So when you're there, you just look at the mistakes?
No, but you see them. I mean, you see where they're using the wrong way of transit, or where there's, you know, aria creeps in. Because it's what gets me. And I saw something here on a big new building. There was this very expensive chrome lettering in Arial. Okay, I mean, you know, it's a typeface, fine. But if you spend a shitload of money in having something built from metal, cut from brass or gold or silver or chrome, and you use a Microsoft system font, that is just totally disgusting. That really is, there is no excuse for that. There's absolutely no excuse for that. And we have this in Berlin. The Ministry of Finances has the big facade, an old Nazi building, beautiful building if I may say that, even though it's a Nazi building, in large, you know, 3-foot Arial metal letters, when you believe it. The station down below called Neumohrenstraße, used to be Hitler's station, the Reichsbanker, is in Verdana. And they have their own bloody typeface. So who are these idiots who spec this stuff? I just don't get it. And that's the beginning of the end. I mean, that starts falling apart, then it starts falling apart. And then they say, oh, you know, yellow, orange, who cares, you know, and then the colors creep in, and that, you know, it's called entropy, which, as we know, is a natural law, and there's no escaping ultimately. But the system like this has to avoid entropy, because entropy is the enemy of organization, and a transit system, by definition, even though I don't like organization, has to be organized. Trains are on time, or else they wouldn't be called trains, right? They'd be called caravans or whatever. Okay, I'm exhausted. I'm also hungry.
So I thought maybe it's a good idea to finish with some personal words about you, Susanna Roth. No? Yes, of course. So in our 22 years together, one discovers that it's the little things that make life a rich one. So here I can provide a short list of little personal things that make Erik truly happy. A perfectly set breakfast table, dark bread and hard cheese, hot tea with a little sugar and milk, 2 eggs in a glass, coffee black, espresso perfect, piping hot short with cream, guacamole, bourbon vanilla quark from Butter Lindner in Berlin, sorbet but only lemon or cassis, Kaffee und Kuchenzeit, which is coffee and cake time, a glass of Montrachet, what is that?
It's the best Burgundy white wine.
Okay. Hot chocolate made, okay. Hot chocolate made from molten chocolate, preferably Cho, which doesn't exist anymore. The Tuesday FAZ, which is a newspaper in Germany for Technik and Motor, so for the part about technique and cars, right? White shirts with narrow colors, white handkerchiefs, briefs versus boxers, handmade shoes, thin ties, narrow suits, socks that don't slip. Thank you.
Sign the book.
And before that, you have to buy it, of course, outside. And yeah, it took me five years to make this book. So tell other people that it's a good one. Thank you.